What's up, cinephiles? My name is TJ and welcome to Cinemateq. Usually we do weekly news wrap-ups on this channel, but today we're doing something a little different. I'm going to be reviewing my experience at the Blood in the Snow Film Festival, a genre film festival that takes place in Toronto, and it focuses specifically on Canadian films. Now don't run away, because some of these films were actually really good. I know when I say Canadian films, even Canadians can sometimes go, oh no, not a Canadian film. But there were some gems here that I want you to know about. But before we get started, I just want to remind you to subscribe to this channel. You never want to miss any of the content we put out, because it's just so darn good, I hope. All right, so let's talk about the movies. For one, I am not a fan of giving films ratings. I don't think it ever really makes sense to do it. However, I am going to be talking about things I liked and things I didn't like about each of the films. And by the end of each little synopsis and review, I think you're gonna have a pretty clear indication of what I thought about it, and whether or not I think you should see it. Naturally, your taste might be different than mine, and so I try to construct each little mini review to reflect that. And one more reason to stay till the end of the festival, I have decided to bestow an award on one of these films, except it's not going to be a film that I think was the best film in the festival, but rather the film that I think that will generate good film conversations. That's all I've ever really wanted out of this channel, is to have good film conversations, and I think spotlighting a film that does that is only natural. So let's jump right in with the first film, Puppet Killer by Lisa Ovies. And this film was so much fun. In short, a killer puppet kills teenagers in a way that pays homage to all of your favorite 80s slasher horror films. This movie required a lot of love to make, and with that love comes a kind of acknowledgement that those horror movies that we so adore from the early 80s, even the late 70s, are kind of ridiculous and have lots of ridiculous aspects to them. Executed poorly, and that ridiculousness could have derailed the entire film. But Puppet Killer is anything but poor. I have not laughed in a movie theater in a long time, more than I laughed at this film. It was so goddamn funny in parts, and a lot of it has to do with the director's decision to cast, let's call them more mature actors, as teenagers, as is a kind of extension of the horror film trope. Although this film goes a bit further with that. If I have one criticism of this film, it's that it doesn't do enough to acknowledge the history of Canadian horror film. And as it is a Canadian film made by Canadians, I feel they could have done a little bit more, especially to maybe slip in a reference to Black Christmas or Prom Night. Although I have to say, the longer than brief cameo of the Soska sisters really scratched that Canadiana itch that I have. All in all, it's a well-made, funny homage to all the films you loved if you're a horror fan. And if you're watching this video, you're probably a horror fan. Moving on, we have Happy Face by Alexander Franchi, and this film is a punch to the gut. It follows the lives of differently faced and traumatized people as they try to find a spot for themselves in society, eventually deciding that the best way to do that is to just force their way in and not ask for permission. If you have ever felt marginalized or looked down on or bullied because of your appearance, you are probably going to shed some tears by the end of this film. You're probably going to shed a few more when you start thinking about it afterwards. It is an emotionally devastating film. Personally, I'm not even sure why this film is playing in a genre film festival. Not to say anything bad about Blood in the Snow, kudos to them for programming it, but to me this film belongs in a festival like TIFF, a more conventional festival. And according to the filmmaker, it's actually been getting a lot of plays in genre festivals, which to me is a way of equating the people in the film with the monsters that you might find in other films in a genre film festival. In a film where people are trying to shed the stigma of being deemed monstrous by society, it just feels weird to have that playing beside movies that have actual monsters in them. It's as if by being in a genre festival, it suggests that these people actually are monsters to begin with, and that they must go through the ordeal of the film in order to come out as something else at the end. And I don't think that this is at all what Blood in the Snow is intending, or what these other genre film festivals were intending either. It's just strange to me that it would play in so many genre festivals and yet not get as much play in more conventional festivals. I could easily see this being a TIFF film. I'm actually surprised that it wasn't. Regardless of where it screens, I think you should absolutely see it. It's a film that will elicit a lot of emotions in you that you might not have thought were even there. And as I said, it's just a punch to the gut. And it has a bit of catharsis to go along with it. So an absolutely worthwhile movie-going experience. Moving on to She Never Died, a side story sequel to the film He Never Died, a film that I admittedly have not seen. And for those of you who are like me and have not seen He Never Died, you don't need to have seen it in order to get what She Never Died is doing. The film's main function is to build on the world that was first developed in He Never Died, but I would have much preferred for the filmmakers to take a step back from this and focus on the plot of She Never Died and develop it into something that was more than something that relied on smart people doing dumb things. The villains of this film are set up as criminal masterminds, but their downfall really only comes about because they make mistake after stupid mistake. Call it a horror trope, but when criminal mastermind villains fall prey to their own stupidity, it really undermines the world that has been constructed, or in this case, has been expanded on. She Never Dies is at its best when pairs of actors are able to get together and have small scenes together, and there are actual moments of joy to be found within it. There's also some pretty good gore effects in it, so kudos to the film for that. I would just prefer that building a potential film franchise would take a backseat to developing a believable narrative with characters who act their IQ. But like I said, those gore effects are pretty nice, so if that's what you're into, maybe you should cuddle up with this film. Next up, we have Dead Dicks by Chris Bavoda and Lee Paula Springer. Dead Dicks is the kind of Canadian film that I have been programmed to roll my eyes at. The setup is flimsy, the acting is overly dramatic, and there are characters that really don't serve any actual purpose. But Dead Dicks is so much more than that. As the film progressed, it slowly started to sink its teeth into me. The shallow attempts at comedy gave way to earnest family drama. The premise, which I won't spoil here, had an internal logic that was never broken and in fact got expanded on in really interesting and clever ways. And the quality of the acting continued to improve until the end of the film, which might seem surprising because we were with essentially the same 2 to 3 characters for the entire film, and they all just continued to improve until the very end. The film suffers from some of the pitfalls that you might expect for a feature film made on absolutely no budget. As an example, the audio quality I found was pretty inconsistent. But if you can ignore that and the first 10 or 15 minutes or so and get really into the meat of the film, I think there is a film here that you will enjoy. I know I did. Next up, we have The Nights Before Christmas by Paul Tanter, and this is a film that is really trying to punch above its weight class. Unfortunately, the last half is marred by repetitive expository dialogue, and the film is so unfocused that by the end I found myself wondering who the protagonist was actually supposed to be. The film succeeds when it presents its main villains, Santa and Mrs. Claus, as equal parts crazy and intelligent. And I think it's safe to say that they are the standout villains from the entire Blood in the Snow festival. Unfortunately, the marvelous performances by Simon Phillips and Sela Degoda are wasted on a script that isn't as confident in their characters' intelligence as the FBI that's chasing them. If the characters of Santa and Mrs. Claus were to return in another film, I would probably check it out just to see those actors play these characters again. But unfortunately, in the case of The Nights Before Christmas, there isn't enough good things surrounding them, both from a writing and from an acting perspective, to recommend actually seeing this film. So despite some standout performances, this film is a complete pass, in my opinion. Next up, we have Majic by Aaron Barry. And Majic plays kind of like a lo-fi X-Files episode that's been mixed together with an audio drama. And that's actually kind of a good thing in most cases. Paula Bercanti's performance is the best part of the film, and watching her oscillate between pursuer of truth and someone who's turning into a paranoid mess is joyous to watch. It's especially a feat considering how much dialogue she actually has to say. This film feels like it was a straight adaptation of a stage play rather than an original script. And actually, I'm not sure if that's not the case. Unfortunately, it's the dialogue that turns out to be the film's greatest foe. There is a lot of repetitive exposition, which I think the filmmakers used as a way to anchor the audience in what was potentially a confusing plot. But it wasn't confusing, and a lot of the times I was hearing this dialogue, it was information that I knew, and it really just seemed to stop any of the narrative momentum that the film had. I think fans of the X-Files and conspiracy theories in general will find a lot to like in this film. And if the writing team of Aaron Barry and David Blazkowicz can rein in their dialogue, then I would be pretty into seeing what they can do, especially if Barry was directing again. And now we move on to Hunter's Moon by Stephen Morana. For those of you who have played One Night Werewolf, you're going to recognize a lot of what's going on in Hunter's Moon. The film takes place at a party celebrating the release of a One Night Werewolf-like video game. And guess what? There's a secret werewolf, and the humans have to find out who he is before they all get shredded to bits. And let me tell you, there's lots of shredding in this movie. First off, I want to say that the creature effects in this movie were pretty good. I really liked the look of the werewolf, and the gore effects were also pretty good as well. And that's where my praises for the film pretty much end. I prefer films that show and don't tell, and the first 15 minutes or so of this film, there's a lot of telling. There's a lot of narration that tells you the backstories of characters, and to a certain degree, I wonder to what extent those backstories were even necessary for us to know. Especially when you go further into the film, a lot of those backstories are hinted at or discussed by the characters, so I don't know if that setup was really necessary. There are also interactions in this film that literally no one in the world would ever have. As an example, a woman at one point tells a game developer that she would like to show him her GUI. Hands up if you ever thought you would hear a graphical user interface used as a synonym for a vagina.
Put your hand down.
The choice of music in the film is also very odd. They decided to go with a kind of uninspiring hip-hop beat, and they use different beats in different sections of the film, but in a lot of cases it's undercutting what is actually going on in the film. There's supposed to be tension, and instead of building tension, they play a hip-hop beat which is doing the opposite of building tension. It didn't really make any sense to me. And then there are also script issues. There are things that are set up that are not paid off. There is character information inserted into the film, which is then undermined at the end of the film for the sake of the plot. Overall, this film really fell flat for me, and I just wouldn't recommend that you see it. Next up, we have Deep Six, which is actually a web series, but it was presented in the festival as a film. And if you want to, you could go stream it on YouTube right now. In fact, I'll leave a link to it in the description below. The film follows a crew in a deep space forward operating station, and all kinds of things just start going wrong, and they end up potentially on the brink of a galactic war. And I was pretty meh on the whole thing, although it did tend to improve as it went along. The last two episodes, if you want to call them that, were definite improvements over what came before. And I think this film would have benefited by going with a more lo-fi or minimalist aesthetic instead of trying to be Battlestar Galactica. And because of what they were actually able to afford due to their set design budget, it comes off looking like a shitty Battlestar Galactica. I think there is a general lesson here for filmmakers who are going out and making their first film or their first web series. Think about the budget that you're going to have when you're actually writing your script and plan accordingly. If you absolutely love sci-fi, I would say, yeah, go check it out. It's free on YouTube right now. But if it's something that you had to pay money for, I don't think it was something that I would be able to recommend. Last up, we have Z by Brandon Christensen. And if Blood in the Snow were a high school yearbook, then Z would be the film most likely to succeed in the mainstream. It's a paint-by-numbers, haunted house, imaginary friend type story. It follows a family whose child develops an imaginary friend named Z, and then it turns out that that imaginary friend was actually the mother's imaginary friend as well. Z actually wants to possess the mother, and so it terrorizes things around the child in order to get the mother to go a little bit crazy. And when I say possess, I don't mean in the Exorcist kind of way, I mean in the abusive relationship kind of way. The relationship between Z and the mother, whose name is Elizabeth, and who is played by Keegan-Connor Tracy, is central to the film. Their relationship is framed as a pretty obvious metaphor for domestic abuse, but I never found that the film cynically relied on Elizabeth's pain and suffering. Instead, it decided to focus on her struggle to escape and to protect her son. So if you're in the mood for a pretty standard horror film and you're okay with the occasional terrible-looking CGI fire, then I would have no problem recommending Z to you. The only caveat I have is that on the rare moments when we see Z on screen, the actual way that the character looks changes, and I imagine that there is a narrative reason for this. However, the first couple of times that we see Z, he looks pretty goofy. And these are not meant to be moments when he is shown as being playful or humorous. They are from what are supposed to be genuinely terrifying moments of the film. And so showing him, especially for the very first time, as being a strange goofball oddity type creature, it really counteracts what I think the film is trying to do in those scenes. Later on, he does look a lot scarier, and I just wish that these first few times that we saw him weren't as childlike. So those are all the films that I saw at the Blood in the Snow Film Festival. I hope that some of my little reviews of them are going to help you make a film watching decision. And as I said at the beginning of the video, I'm going to be handing out an award to the film that I think curries the best kind of film discussions. And in the case for this particular edition of the Blood in the Snow Film Festival, that award must go to Happy Face. There are so many conversations that you can have about this film after you've finished watching it. It can be used as an educational piece. You can even have meta discussions as to what film should be playing in what film festivals. So to you, Happy Face and director Alexandre Franchi, congratulations. You've made a very good film, and I hope many people go to see it and start talking about it. Speaking of which, I'd love for you to talk about this particular Cinemateq video in the comments below. Do you like these little reviews, and do you think that you got something by watching it? Are you going to check out any of the films? Are you going to definitely not check out any of the films based on what I've said? Have you seen any of the films that I talked about, and do you disagree with me? I would love to have those kinds of conversations in the comments. So that's it, I'm out of here. Please make sure to detonate a thermonuclear bomb on the like button. It's the only way to be sure, and I would love for you to subscribe to this channel and, I don't know, maybe tap the notification bell if you are in the mood. My name's TJ, this is Cinemateq, and I'll see you in the next video.